Blacks in Europe from prehistory to contemporary times. Was Europe once a black continent? Where did Europeans come from? The white man. Did they live in the caves of Europe? Or are they descendants of albinos? Were there once kings of Europe? Were they black kings, kings of Britain, France, and Germany? What was the Moorish rule like in ancient Europe? If you want answers to these questions and more, you want to read Blacks in Europe, from prehistory to contemporary times. In this book, you will discover that Europe has a diverse history that is often not discussed and taught in the schools. The history of Europe is different from what we were taught in school. The traditional history of Europe teaches that the first inhabitants of Europe were the Neanderthals, cavemen that lived in Europe during the Ice Age, who were pale-skinned and probably represent the ancestors of the anatomically modern European humans. Although this history was taught in the schools, in reality, Neanderthal man and the first anatomically modern European, Cro-Magnon man, was dark-skinned, not pale-skinned. This history is scary to the average European or Caucasian. It is scary because this archaeological evidence proves that Europe was early a continent inhabited by blacks, just like Africa. A continent where the tools and other cultural artifacts used in prehistoric Europe were originally used in South Africa. That's right. The tools of the Arignacian and Solutrean culture people were tools that were first used in South Africa, used by black people, the Khoisan. In Blacks in Europe from prehistory to contemporary times, we discuss the Neanderthal and first Europeans that introduced civilization to the European continent. Blacks in Europe from prehistory to contemporary times is divided into 12 chapters. It begins with the discussion of the Paleo-Europeans that were determined as black people by craniometrics from Siberia to ancient Britain. We know they were dark-skinned after review of the genetic evidence, which indicates that genes for white skin did not appear among Caucasians until tens of thousands of years later. Europeans were latecomers to Europe. The Greek and Roman classical literature discussed in Blacks in Europe from prehistory to contemporary times illustrates that much of the classical literature is about the melanated Pelagians, Garamantes, and Daniels. We discussed the possible African roots of the Greek philosopher Socrates and the identity of the Garamantes, the founders of Minoan civilization, often called the Captiu, as Africans who came from the Fezzan in Libya. Who are the people of the sea? Where does the sea people come from? These questions need to be answered. The answers are found in Blacks in Europe from prehistory to contemporary times. In this book, we review the Egyptian records and identify the homeland of the people of the sea. Blacks in Europe from prehistory to contemporary times did not just talk about the ancient blacks. It also explores the possible African influence on the Vikings. That's right, the Vikings. And other medieval groups like the Moors who ruled Europe for almost 1,000 years. Did you know that? The Moors ruled Europe for almost 1,000 years. The Moors didn't leave Europe until 1492. Coincidentally, the same year that the colonists came to the New World. Finally, Blacks in Europe from prehistory to contemporary times reviews the history of blacks from Iberia and France into Britain since 1492 up to 2020. Learn about the heroes and royals that ruled over Europe for thousands of years. In this book, for the first time, your questions about the origin of Caucasians will be answered. Was Europe once a black continent? Did contemporary Europeans originate in the caves of Europe? Or are they descendants of albinos? Were some of the medieval European kings black? If you want answers to these questions, you want to buy this book. You will find answers to all these questions and more, and finally learn the true history of Europe, the Black continent.